Please don't shoot. I'll give you children if you spare me." She was tied to a tree, shaking in the snow, and the lonely mountain man smiled instantly. No one knew why he lowered the rifle. No one ever smiles in these woods unless it means trouble or something worse. She thought she was begging for her life. But some words stir old wounds and wake sleeping ghosts. Now the fire's lit, the snow is falling, and something's coming through the trees. A storm, a shadow, or a reckoning. Only he knows which. Why did he let her live? And what will he do when the past comes looking for both of them? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The first snowflakes drifted between the towering pines, settling softly on Sam Boone's buckskin-clad shoulders as he crouched to study the fresh tracks in the dirt. His weathered fingers traced the edge of a boot print, noting its depth and direction. These weren't the marks of deer or elk he typically found along his trapline. The tracks told a clear story to his experienced eyes. Multiple men, moving fast, dragging something, or someone. His jaw tightened as he straightened up, unconsciously checking the powder in his rifle's pan. The weapon was as much a part of him as his own arm after decades in these mountains. Following the trail with the silent grace of a lifetime spent in the wilderness, Sam moved through the trees like a shadow. The sound of sobbing reached his ears before he saw her. In a small clearing ahead, a young woman was bound to a thick pine trunk, her wrists raw and bleeding from the rough rope. Her dress was torn, dark hair tangled with pine needles. She couldn't have been more than 20 summers old. When she spotted him emerging from the trees with his rifle raised, her eyes went wide with terror. "Please don't shoot," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'll give you children if you spare me." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Something shifted in his chest, an old wound breaking open. He lowered his rifle slowly, remembering another woman's terrified eyes from long ago. His Maria. The memory of her death at the hands of vigilantes still burned like hot iron in his gut. "Ain't gonna hurt you, miss," he said softly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he approached. The girl trembled as he drew his knife, but held still as he carefully cut through her bonds. "Name's Sam Boone. You're safe now." She swayed as the ropes fell away, her legs buckling. Sam caught her before she could fall, noting how light she felt in his arms, like a wounded bird. "Thank you," she whispered, then promptly fainted. Sam carried her back to his line shack, moving carefully through the thickening snow. The one-room cabin was spare but solid, built to withstand the brutal mountain winters. He laid her gently on his narrow cot and set about making her comfortable. Soon the iron pot bubbled with fresh water over the fire. Sam cleaned and bandaged her wounded wrists with strips torn from his cleanest shirt, his big hands surprisingly gentle. He'd learned field medicine during his Army Scout days, though he tried not to think about those times anymore. When she finally stirred, he had a tin cup of hot rabbit stew waiting. "Best eat something," he said, helping her sit up. "What's your name, miss?" "Lenora," she managed between careful sips. "Lenora Bright." Her hands shook so badly that Sam had to steady the cup. As full dark settled outside and the snow continued to fall, Sam wrapped Lenora in his best beaver fur. She curled up by the fire like a child, exhaustion finally claiming her. But sleep eluded Sam as he sat in his wooden chair, watching the flames dance. Her desperate offer echoed in his mind. "I'll give you children." The words twisted something deep in his soul, bringing back memories he'd spent years trying to bury. His Maria, heavy with their adopted infant son, both lost in a single night of senseless violence, the way she'd begged for mercy from men who had none to give. Sam's calloused fingers found the small wooden cross that hung always around his neck, Maria's last gift to him. He'd abandoned his faith along with civilization after their deaths, retreating to these lonely mountains where a man could live or die by his own hand. But tonight, watching this wounded girl sleep in the firelight, something stirred in him that he'd thought long dead. Not desire, Nothing so base as that, but rather a fierce protectiveness. A reminder that even in this harsh land, mercy could still bloom like spring flowers through mountain snow. The fire crackled softly as Sam kept his vigil, his rifle across his knees. Outside, an owl called into the snowy night, but no other sounds disturbed the peace of the cabin. For the first time in years, its solitude felt not like a fortress, but like a shelter, a place where healing might begin. The mountain storm arrived with the dawn, bringing howling winds that rattled the shutters of Sam's lined shack. Snow whipped sideways past the small window, building drifts against the rough-hewn logs. Inside, Sam worked quietly at the iron stove, where a pot of cornmeal mush bubbled and thickened. He'd noticed the chimney drawing poorly the night before, and despite the weather, he knew it needed fixing. Wrapping himself in his heavy coat, Sam climbed onto the roof, using the crude ladder he'd built years ago. The bitter wind cut through his clothes as he cleared ice from the chimney vent, his fingers growing numb despite his leather gloves. Back inside, stamping snow from his boots, Sam found Lenora awake and sitting up on her cot. She'd drawn the beaver fur tight around her shoulders, watching him with wary eyes. The cabin's sparse furnishings stood in sharp relief in the grey morning light. A rough table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserved food and hunting supplies. "Storm's moved in proper now," Sam said, ladling hot mush into 2 tin bowls. "Best settle in for a spell." Lenora accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, eating slowly and methodically. Her gaze drifted around the cabin, taking in every detail: the stack of firewood by the hearth, the rifle rack on the wall, the collection of traps hanging from pegs. When her eyes fell on a small bundle near the fireplace, she paused. Tiny moccasins, carefully beaded but worn with age, lay wrapped in a piece of soft deer skin. Sam saw her looking, and his shoulders tensed, but he said nothing. After a long silence broken only by the wind's moan, Sam finally spoke. "Reckon you might tell me how you came to be tied to that tree?" His voice was gentle, without demand. Lenora set down her empty bowl, fingers twisting in the fur around her shoulders. "A man named Zeke Monroe," she said quietly. He says he bought me fair and square from a traveling preacher 3 months ago." Sam's hand tightened on his spoon, but his face remained carefully neutral. "No man can own another, miss. That ain't God's way nor the law's." "Zeke doesn't care much for either," Lenora said bitterly. "When I tried to run, Her voice caught. "I thought you were one of his men when I first saw you. They'd left me there to die, to teach me a lesson about disobedience." The wind rattled the shutters fiercely, as if emphasizing her words. Sam rose and added wood to the fire, giving her time to collect herself. When he spoke again, his voice was low, but carried an edge of steel. "You're safe here for now, Miss Bright, but a man like that, he won't let go easy. Like as not, he'll come hunting once the weather clears." Lenora nodded, her face pale but composed. "I know. I've seen what he does to those who cross him." As evening approached and the storm showed no signs of weakening, Sam pulled out an old quilt that needed mending. He'd never been much for sewing, but frontier life demanded such skills. To his surprise, Lenora asked to help, her nimble fingers quickly finding holes that needed patching. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the regular motion of needles punctuated by the crack and pop of burning logs in the fireplace. Sam watched how surely she handled the needle despite her bandaged wrists, noting the quiet determination in her movements. "There's a cot here for you," he said finally, tying off a thread. "For as long as you need shelter. Ain't much, but it's dry and warm." Lenora's hand stilled on the quilt. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Sam was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. "Reckon sometimes a body just needs helping is all. Don't need more reason than that." He didn't mention how her presence had already begun shifting something in the cabin's atmosphere, filling its lonely corners with a kind of life he'd almost forgotten. How her quiet strength in the face of cruelty reminded him of another brave woman long ago. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the cabin, two people worked steadily by lamplight, piecing together what was broken, finding unexpected comfort in shared silence and simple tasks. The tiny moccasins lay forgotten by the hearth, witnesses to new possibilities taking root in old soil. The storm raged for 2 more days, transforming the mountain into a white fortress of silence and snow. By the 3rd morning, Sam knew they needed to replenish the depleting woodpile. He dug out his spare coat, a heavy wool garment worn soft with age, and held it out to Lenora. "Won't be out long," he said, watching her slip her arms into the oversized sleeves. "But we need more firewood before nightfall." Outside, the world had turned pristine and strange. Snow lay knee-deep around the cabin, and the familiar shapes of trees and rocks wore thick white mantles. Their breath came out in clouds as they waded through the drifts to where several fallen logs waited beneath a tarp. Sam worked methodically with his axe, splitting the seasoned wood into manageable pieces. Lenora gathered what she could carry, her movements careful in the deep snow. The only sounds were the sharp crack of the axe and the soft whisper of branches releasing their burden of snow. In this hushed landscape, Lenora found her voice. "Those moccasins by your hearth," she said quietly, adjusting her armload of wood. "They're beautifully made. Did someone special make them?" Sam's axe paused mid-swing. For a long moment, there was only the sound of settling snow. Then he lowered the axe, his weathered face distant with memory. "My wife made those," he said finally. She was Apache. Name was Morning Star. His voice grew rough. "Best beadwork you ever saw. Learned it from her grandmother." Lenora waited, sensing there was more. Sam split another log, each movement deliberate. "We found a baby," he continued, words coming slower now. "Just a tiny thing, abandoned at a massacre site. Morning Star, she wrapped him in her shawl and wouldn't let go. Said the Creator sent him to us." He stacked the split wood carefully. "She made those moccasins for when his feet grew bigger." "What happened to them?" Lenora asked softly, though something in her heart already knew. Sam's hands stilled on the wood. "Mob of vigilantes, didn't cotton to a white man living with an Apache woman, came in the night, torched our cabin while we slept." His voice turned to gravel. "I got Morning Star out, but the smoke, she went back in for the baby. Neither one came out." The silence that followed felt as heavy as the snow-laden branches above them. Lenora stepped closer, setting down her wood. "I'm so sorry, Sam." He nodded once, sharply, then picked up his axe again. They finished gathering wood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Back inside the warmth of the cabin, they settled into what had become their routine. Lenora sat in the chair by the window, carefully darning holes in wool socks, while Sam worked at the table with a broken flintlock, his sure hands cleaning and oiling each part. The familiar movements of domestic life filled the cabin. The soft scrape of Lenora's needle, the click of gun parts being reassembled, the pop and hiss of the fire. It felt almost like a dance, the way they moved around each other, passing tools or thread without need for words. Sam found himself watching how she'd pause in her mending to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, or the way she'd hum softly while working on a particularly difficult hole. Her presence had begun to wake something he'd thought long dead, the simple comfort of shared space, of another person's quiet movements marking the passage of time. That evening, as darkness gathered early outside their windows, they sat with cups of coffee by the fire. The remnants of their supper, squirrel stew with the last of the summer's dried vegetables, sat warming on the hearth. "You know," Lenora said, a hint of mischief in her tired eyes, "I reckon these mountain squirrels must be mighty special, the way they manage to taste exactly like chicken." The joke caught Sam off guard. A rusty sound emerged from his throat, a chuckle, surprising them both. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed at anything. "Mighty special indeed," he agreed, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Though I'd say they're more partial to tasting like rabbit myself. Lenora's answering smile warmed the cabin more than any fire could. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee, while outside the snow continued to fall, blanketing their small world in peaceful white. Sam's boots crunched through fresh snow as he made his rounds, checking his trapline. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees, and his breath came out in white puffs against the crisp mountain air. He'd left Lenora back at the cabin, safe and warm, mending a torn quilt. The silence of the woods broke suddenly with a sound that made him freeze, a child's faint cry carried on the wind from the direction of the river bend. Sam's hand went to his rifle as he changed course, following the sound with careful steps. Near the frozen riverbank, huddled against a snow-crusted boulder, he found a small boy. The child couldn't have been more than 9 years old, his dark hair dusted with snow. He wore thin clothes, completely inadequate for the brutal mountain weather, and his fingers were blue as they clutched a wooden doll split nearly in half. "Hey there, son," Sam said softly, crouching down. The boy's eyes were glassy with cold, his lips trembling as he tried to speak. Without hesitation, Sam shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the half-frozen child. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He scooped the boy up, noting how little he weighed, and began the trek back to his cabin. The child curled against his chest, still clutching the broken doll, his shivers violent enough to shake them both. When Sam shouldered open the cabin door, Lenora's gasp filled the small space. "Jonas!" she breathed, dropping her needlework and rushing forward. "Oh my lord, Jonas." Sam laid the boy on the cot nearest the fire, while Lenora piled every blanket they had around him. Her hands shook as she touched his cold cheek. "I know him from my aunt's mission school," she explained, voice thick with emotion. "He's one of our students from the reservation, down in the valley." "Water's still hot," Sam said, moving to the hearth where a pot hung over the flames. He poured some into a tin cup, adding a spoonful of honey they'd been saving. "Here, son. Small sips." As warmth slowly returned to Jonas's limbs, his trembling eased enough for him to speak. "Bad men came," he whispered, his English clear but haunted. "Brown coats. They burned the mission. Miss Sarah told us to run, but—" His voice broke. Lenora's face had gone pale. "Zeke," she said. "Was one of them? Was he tall, with a scar here?" She touched her chin. Jonas nodded, clutching the splintered doll tighter. He laughed when they set the fire. Sam's jaw clenched as he stoked the flames higher. The mission school was several miles downrange from his cabin, serving the local Navajo community. That Zeke would expand his cruelty to attack children and missionaries spoke volumes about the man's character. "You're safe now," Lenora soothed, smoothing Jonas's hair back from his forehead. She spoke a few gentle words in Navajo, and the boy's eyes widened in recognition. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he responded in the same language. As evening settled in, Jonas finally drifted to sleep, wrapped in warm blankets with his broken doll tucked beside him. Lenora sat nearby, humming softly as she tried to repair the toy with careful stitches. "I need more kindling," Sam said quietly, reaching for his coat. The temperature was dropping fast with nightfall, and they'd need to keep the fire hot through the night. Outside, the woods had grown darker than pitch between the trees. Sam gathered fallen branches by feel more than sight, his movements automatic after years of living alone in these mountains. A sound made him pause. Far off through the trees, a dog's mournful howl rose and fell. Then, abruptly, silence. Sam stood motionless, strained to hear more, but only the soft fall of snow and the creak of wind-blown branches filled the night. His hand tightened on his axe as he gazed into the darkness, knowing that somewhere out there, Zeke Monroe and his men were drawing closer, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. He gathered the last of the kindling quickly and returned to the cabin's warmth. Inside, Lenora had dozed off in her chair, her hand still resting protectively on Jonas's blanket-covered shoulder. The broken doll lay in her lap, partially mended. Sam added wood to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. The boy's arrival had changed everything. It wasn't just about protecting Lenora anymore. Zeke's violence now threatened an entire community, including innocent children. As he settled into his chair by the door, rifle across his knees, Sam knew sleep would be long in coming this night. The pale light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window as Sam pulled on his boots. Jonas watched him intently from his nest of blankets, dark eyes curious and alert despite the early hour. Near the hearth, Lenora stirred a pot of porridge, the wooden spoon scraping rhythmically against the iron. "Want to learn something useful?" Sam asked Jonas softly. The boy nodded, scrambling to his feet. Sam retrieved a length of wire from his trapping supplies and gestured toward the door. "Let's catch breakfast." Outside, frost sparkled on pine needles and fresh snow crunched under their boots. Sam led Jonas to a small clearing where rabbit tracks crisscrossed the white ground. Kneeling in the snow, he showed the boy how to bend the wire into a perfect loop. "See here," Sam demonstrated, his weathered hands moving with practiced ease. "You want to set it just so, where their trail meets the brush." Jonas leaned in close, watching as Sam anchored the snare to a sturdy branch. "Too tight, they'll spot it. Too loose, they'll slip right through." The boy's fingers were nimble as he tried making his own loop, his face scrunched in concentration. "Like this?" he asked, holding up his work. "That's right, fine." Sam nodded, something warm stirring in his chest at the pride in Jonas's smile. "You've got a good eye." When they returned to the cabin, the rich smell of porridge filled the air. Lenora had added dried berries and the last of their honey to the pot. She ladled generous portions into tin bowls, passing them around with a gentle smile. "Much obliged," Jonas said carefully, mimicking Sam's earlier words. He settled cross-legged by the fire, balancing his bowl on his knee while working on a piece of wood with Sam's smaller knife. Shavings curled away as he carved, slowly shaping a crude spoon. Lenora watched him work while she ate, then began to hum softly, a melody that made Jonas look up sharply. "That's Miss Sarah's song," he said. "My aunt taught it to me." Lenora explained, her voice growing tender. "Would you like to learn it?" When Jonas nodded, she began to sing properly, her clear voice filling the cabin. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Jonas picked up the tune quickly, his young voice joining hers on the second verse. Sam listened silently, something tight and painful, squeezing his heart as their voices twined together in the morning light. Later, while Jonas napped and Sam checked the trapline, Lenora found paper and a stubby pencil in Sam's few possessions. She sat at the rough-hewn table, carefully composing a letter. "Dearest Aunt Mary, I pray this finds you well, though I know it cannot reach you until the spring thaw. I am safe, thanks to God's providence and the kindness of a good man. Samuel Boone found me when I most needed saving, and has given shelter to both me and young Jonas from your mission school." Her pencil scratched across the paper as she described Sam's quiet strength, his gentle way with Jonas, how he'd offered sanctuary without hesitation. Though she knew the letter would stay hidden away for months, the act of writing helped settle her spirit. As evening drew in, they gathered around the fire. Jonas had found Sam's old Bible earlier, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. He opened it carefully, running his finger along the lines as he read aloud. "God setteth the solitary in families, he bringeth out those which are bound with chains." The words hung in the fire-lit air. Sam stood abruptly, moving to the door. "Need to check the woodpile," he muttered, his voice rough. Outside, the cold air bit at his face as he stumbled into the shadows of the towering pines. The tears came then, hot and sudden, for all he'd lost and found again. His Apache wife's smile, their adopted babe's tiny fingers, the flame-bright night that took them both. The memories crashed over him like a flood. But now there was Jonas's careful spoon carving, Lenora's hymn-sweet voice, the way they'd begun to move around each other like a real family. It hurt like a healing wound, like spring ice breaking up on the river. Sam pressed his forehead against rough bark, letting the tears fall silently as the evening stars began to prick through the darkening sky above the pines. Behind him, the cabin's window glowed warm and golden. Inside, he could hear Lenora and Jonas singing another hymn, their voices carried soft on the winter air. For the first time in more years than he could count, the mountain's vast silence felt less like sanctuary and more like loneliness. The next morning dawned sharp and cold. Sam stepped out onto the cabin's front porch, his breath clouding in the crisp air. Something felt wrong. His eyes scanned the tree line, noting how the fresh powder lay unmarked except for… There! His shoulders tensed. Near the outer ridge, a line of boot prints marred the pristine snow. Fresh tracks, made within the hour. The steps were evenly spaced, deliberate, not the wandering path of a lost traveler. Someone had been watching the cabin. Sam moved silently along the prints, reading the story they told. 3 men, maybe 4, carrying heavy packs. They'd circled the ridge before pulling back into the deeper woods. His jaw tightened. Zeke's men had found them. Back at the cabin, he found Lenora teaching Jonas how to knit with some spare yarn she'd discovered. Their heads were bent together over the clicking needles, peaceful and unaware. Sam's chest ached at the sight. "Need you both to stay inside today," he said, checking his rifle's action. "No exceptions." Lenora looked up, her fingers stilling on the yarn. "You found something?" "Tracks." Sam began laying out extra ammunition on the table. "I'm going to set some false trails, make them chase shadows for a while." He turned to Jonas, who had gone very still. "You remember how to bar the door?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, like you showed me." Sam spent the next few hours working his way around the cabin's perimeter, laying misleading tracks that led nowhere and setting up subtle warnings. Threads stretched between trees, patches of snow smoothed just so. If anyone approached, he'd know. As dusk settled over the mountains, Sam took up his position near the shuttered window. His rifle lay across his knees, oiled and ready. Across the cabin, Lenora and Jonas slept peacefully near the hearth, wrapped in blankets and unaware of his vigil. The wind began to shift sometime after midnight, bringing with it the faint scent of wood smoke. Sam's fingers tightened on his rifle. Wrong kind of smoke. The bottle torch hit the shed like a meteor, shattering in a spray of burning kerosene. Flames leaped up the wooden walls as Sam burst through the cabin door, rifle raised. Dark figures darted through the trees, their shapes made monstrous by the fire's glow. A gunshot cracked the night. From inside the cabin came Jonas's terrified scream, "They shot the dog!" Sam's heart clenched. The stray that had been hanging around their woodpile for the past week, the one Jonas had been sneaking scraps to despite Sam's warnings about getting attached. He could hear the boy's muffled sobs through the cabin wall. The shed's flames painted everything in hellish orange. Sam pressed himself against the cabin's corner, scanning for movement. Another bottle torch arced through the air, but fell short, sizzling in the snow. Through the fire's roar, he caught the sound of men's voices, rough with cruel laughter. "Come on out, girl!" a voice called from the darkness. "Zeke's mighty anxious to see you again." Sam's finger curled around his rifle's trigger. In the cabin, he could hear Lenora whispering comfort to Jonas, her voice steady despite everything. The dog lay silent in the snow, its dark shape still against the white ground. The flames from the shed leaped higher, sending shadows dancing across the snow. Sam held his position, watching, waiting. Somewhere in the dark, Zeke's men were out there, preparing their next move. The night had only begun. Inside, Jonas's sobs had quieted to hiccups. The shed's roof began to cave in with a thunderous crash of burning timber. As sparks flew upward into the star-filled sky, Sam settled deeper into his watch position. His rifle remained trained on the tree line, ready for whatever would come with the dawn. The night exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as Sam returned fire, his shots precise and measured. 2 clean hits found their marks. Screams pierced the air as bodies thudded into snow. But more shadows moved through the trees, their numbers greater than he'd feared. "Got you covered!" a voice shouted from the darkness. "Take her now!" Sam's blood ran cold as he heard the cabin door splinter behind him. He whirled, but too late. 2 figures had already crashed through, using his distraction to breach the shelter. Lenora's scream cut through the night. "Sam!" Her voice was desperate, terrified. He charged back towards the door, but rifle fire forced him to dive behind a stack of cordwood. Bullets thudded into the logs, sending splinters flying. By the time he could raise his head, they were dragging Lenora through the snow, her arms pinned behind her back. "Let her go!" Sam roared, but another volley of shots kept him pinned. Through the broken door, Jonas appeared with Sam's spare pistol, tears streaming down his face. "No, Miss Lenora. Stay back," Sam commanded, grabbing the boy before he could run out into the gunfire. He pulled Jonas close, shielding him as more bullets whizzed overhead. The gang retreated into the trees, taking Lenora with them. Her struggles grew fainter as the darkness swallowed them. Soon, only the crackle of the burning shed and the wounded dog's whimpers broke the terrible silence. Jonas twisted in Sam's arms, beating small fists against his chest. "We have to go after them. Please, they're taking her away." "We can't," Sam said, his voice rough with pain. "Not blind in the dark. That's what they want. Us charging down the mountain, stumbling into their sights." He held the boy firmly despite his struggles. "We'd both die, and that wouldn't help Lenora one bit." Jonas collapsed against him, sobbing. "But they'll hurt her." "We'll get her back," Sam promised, surprising himself with the fierce certainty in his voice. "But we do it smart. First light." They turned their attention to immediate needs. The shed fire had to be contained before it could spread to the cabin or the surrounding woods. Sam and Jonas formed a bucket line to the well, throwing snow and water on the flames until the worst of the danger passed. The dog lay where it had fallen, still breathing but badly wounded. Sam examined it by lantern light while Jonas stroked its head, whispering comfort in mixed Navajo and English. The bullet had gone clean through the shoulder, painful, but not fatal with proper care. "Hold him steady," Sam instructed, cleaning and bandaging the wound. The dog whimpered but didn't snap, seeming to understand they were helping. When they finished, Jonas helped carry it inside to rest by the hearth. While the boy tended to the dog, Sam paced the cabin, his mind working. He knew these mountains better than anyone, every game trail, every wash, every hidden pass. More importantly, he knew where Zeke's gang would have to go. The recent snow meant only one safe route down the mountain, following the old mining road through Thunder Canyon. But there was another way. The trapper's route he'd used in leaner years, when he'd needed to transport furs quickly to the trading post. It was treacherous, especially in winter, but it would let them get ahead of Zeke's men. Set up an ambush where the paths merged near Widow's Falls. Sam began gathering supplies: rope, extra ammunition, medical supplies, his sharpest knife. He paused at the shelf where he kept his old Army Scout's compass, untouched for years. His fingers closed around it, feeling the familiar weight. "Jonas," he called softly. The boy looked up from where he sat with the dog. "I need your help getting ready. Think you can handle that?" Jonas wiped his eyes and nodded, standing straighter. "Yes, sir. What do you need?" "Feed and water the horses. They'll need their strength. Then pack this satchel with jerky and any tools you can find. Pliers, wire, anything useful." Sam checked his rifle's action again. "We leave at first light." "Are we going to kill them?" Jonas asked quietly, his young face serious in the lantern light. Sam paused, considering his answer carefully. "We're going to stop them," he said finally. "And we're bringing Lenora home. That's what matters." As Jonas moved to his tasks, Sam watched him work. The boy's movements were quick and sure, despite his fear. Something had changed in both of them tonight, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Sam felt it in his bones, in the way his old instincts had awakened. He'd spent years hiding from the world, believing he deserved his solitude. But now, watching Jonas pack supplies with determined focus, Sam realized he'd been wrong. Sometimes a man's duty wasn't to withdraw from violence, but to stand against it, to protect those who needed protecting. Dawn was still hours away. Sam resumed his vigil by the window, rifle ready, while Jonas curled up with the wounded dog. Together, they waited for enough light to begin the hunt, each lost in their own thoughts of Lenora, and what tomorrow would bring. Sam and Jonas set out at first light, following a narrow creek that wound down the mountainside. The rushing water helped mask their footsteps as they picked their way through patches of fresh snow. Sam moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned tracker, while Jonas tried his best to mirror the older man's careful movements. "See here." Sam crouched, pointing to a scattered pattern in the snow. They tried brushing away their tracks with pine branches, but look closer. Jonas knelt beside him, dark eyes studying the ground. The snow's pushed down harder on one side. "That's right." Sam nodded approvingly. "Means they're carrying something heavy. Or someone." His jaw tightened at the thought of Lenora. They continued downhill, Sam teaching as they went. "Watch for broken twigs at shoulder height," he explained. "Men in a hurry forget to look up. And see those scuff marks on the rocks? Boots sliding in the dark?" Jonas absorbed every word, his young face serious with concentration. The boy had a natural gift for reading sign. Sam noticed. Must be in his blood. Navajo hunters had tracked these mountains for generations before Sam's kind ever arrived. Near midday, they paused at a stand of pines. Sam's keen eyes caught something that made his heart skip. Rusty brown streaks on the pale bark, about waist high. "Blood," he said quietly, touching the stain. It was fresh, maybe 6 hours old. Jonas's face went pale. "Miss Lenora?" "Could be." Sam's voice was grim, but not too much. Might be from when they grabbed her. He squeezed the boy's shoulder. "She's strong, Jonas. Don't forget that." They pushed on, moving faster now that they had a fresher trail. The creek curved through a series of rocky outcrops, and Sam held up his hand, signaling Jonas to stop. A thin tendril of smoke rose from a gully ahead, barely visible against the grey winter sky. Belly crawling through snow-dusted brush, they edged close enough to see Zeke's camp. 6 men huddled around a small fire, passing a bottle. 2 more stood guard near a broken-down wagon, where Lenora sat slumped against one wheel, her hands bound to the axle. Sam's blood boiled at the sight of her bruised face, but he forced himself to stay calm. Think. Plan. They were outnumbered badly, but he had a few tricks left from his scouting days. From his pack, he pulled out a small clay jar sealed with wax. Jonas wrinkled his nose at the pungent smell when Sam opened it. "Skunk oil," Sam whispered, "mixed with pine pitch. Burns slow and stinks worse than anything you've smelled." He studied the wind direction, then pointed to a narrow ravine that branched off from the main gully. "That'll be our trap." Working carefully, Sam soaked several pieces of kindling in the oil mixture. He positioned Jonas with a spare blanket, showing him how to wave it to direct the smoke once the fire was lit. Then Sam circled wide through the trees, setting his decoy fire where the wind would carry its putrid smoke toward the camp. The effect was immediate. Cursing and gagging, 4 of Zeke's men grabbed their rifles and headed for the source of the stench. Sam let them pass, then used his hunting knife to trigger a cascade of loose rock and snow he'd spotted earlier. The avalanche wasn't huge, but it didn't need to be. The narrow ravine filled quickly, trapping the men in deep snow and debris. Jonas, watching from cover, had to clamp both hands over his mouth to keep from cheering. Sam's frontier cunning had just evened the odds considerably. While the remaining gang members were distracted by shouts from their trapped companions, Jonas crept closer to the wagon. His small size and natural stealth let him get within whispered distance of Lenora. "Miss Lenora," he breathed, barely audible. "It's Jonas. Sam's here too." She lifted her head slowly, trying not to draw attention. Despite her split lip and bruised cheek, her eyes sparked with hope when she saw him. "Thank God!" she mouthed silently. Jonas retreated as carefully as he'd come, working his way back to Sam's position. Using the hand signals Sam had taught him on their descent, he indicated how many men remained and where they were posted. "Good boy," Sam whispered. "You did real well. Now we wait for dark." They settled into a protected hollow, sharing jerky and snow melted in a tin cup. Sam kept his rifle ready, watching the camp through a screen of branches. The trapped men were still shouting, but their voices were getting hoarser as the cold worked on them. Jonas huddled close to Sam's side as the afternoon light began to fade. "What do we do now?" "Rest while we can," Sam said softly. "Night's coming, and that's when we move. I've got a plan, but I need you sharp and ready. Think you can handle that?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. For Miss Lenora." "For Miss Lenora," Sam agreed, his weathered face softening slightly. He checked his rifle one more time as shadows lengthened across the snow. Soon now. Very soon. The mountain air grew sharp as night settled over the gully. Stars pierced the darkness like ice crystals, their cold light reflecting off the snow. Sam checked his rifle one final time, then turned to Jonas, who crouched beside him, trembling with both cold and anticipation. "Remember what we practiced," Sam whispered. "Just like tracking rabbits, quiet feet, slow movements." Jonas nodded, his dark eyes serious. "I make the horses spook, then run back to the trees." "That's right. Wait for my owl call before you move." Sam squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Be careful." They separated, Jonas circling wide toward the picketed horses, while Sam worked his way closer to the wagon where Lenora remained bound. Two of Zeke's men dozed by the dying fire. Zeke himself stood guard, pacing near the wagon with his rifle cradled in his arms. Sam waited, barely breathing, as Jonas crept through the shadows. The boy moved like a shadow himself, each step carefully placed. When he reached the horses, he paused, looking back toward Sam's position. Sam made the soft call of a mountain owl. At the signal, Jonas pulled a handful of burrs from his pocket, gathered earlier for just this purpose, and tossed them under the nearest horse's tail. The effect was immediate. The horse squealed and kicked, startling the others. Within moments, the entire picket line erupted in frightened movement. "What the hell?" Zeke spun toward the commotion. "Somebody check those horses!" As his men scrambled to control the panicking animals, Sam moved. His knife made quick work of Lenora's bonds. She sagged against him, her wrists raw and bleeding. "Can you run?" he whispered. She nodded, though her face was tight with pain. Sam helped her to her feet, supporting her as they slipped away from the wagon. They'd made it halfway to the trees when a shout went up behind them. "They're getting away!" Gunfire cracked through the night. Sam pushed Lenora toward cover, turning to return fire. In the chaos, the spooked horses broke free of their ropes. One reared up, iron-shod hooves flashing in the starlight. Zeke, running forward with his rifle raised, took the full force of the kick to his chest. The impact threw him back against the wagon with a sickening crack. Sam moved toward the fallen man, rifle ready. Zeke lay groaning, his face twisted in agony. Years of hatred and pain rose up in Sam's heart as he aimed at Zeke's head. One shot would end it. One shot would avenge every cruel thing this man had done. But before he could pull the trigger, Lenora stumbled between them. Her dress was torn, her face bruised, yet she stood firm. "No, Sam," she pleaded, her voice rough but steady. "He's still human. We're not like them." Sam's finger tightened on the trigger. "After what he did to you." "To Jonas's people." "Please." Lenora's eyes held his. "You showed me mercy when I was helpless. Show it again now." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He remembered that snowy day, Lenora tied to a tree, begging for her life. He'd lowered his rifle then. Could he do it again? His hands shook as he slowly lowered the gun. Behind him, He heard Jonas's quick breathing as the boy emerged from his hiding place. "Get some rope," Sam said roughly. Together, they bound Zeke's hands and feet, leaving him under the wagon with his broken ribs. His remaining men had fled into the darkness, leaving their wounded leader behind. Dawn broke over the mountain as they made their way back up the creek trail. Jonas walked ahead, proudly leading them along the path they'd followed down. Lenora leaned on Sam's arm, her steps growing steadier as they climbed. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening, for choosing mercy." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "Wasn't easy," he finally admitted. "Still ain't sure it was right." "It was." Lenora squeezed his arm. "You proved we're better than them. That hatred doesn't have to win." As the sun rose higher, they heard horses galloping away in the distance. Word would spread through the territory about this night, about the cursed mountain where outlaws met their fate. But Sam knew the real story wouldn't be told in saloons or around campfires. The real victory was in three hearts choosing compassion over vengeance, building something new from the ashes of the past. The morning light caught the snow-laden branches, making them glitter like diamonds. Behind them, the gully where they'd left Zeke was already fading into shadow. Ahead lay the path home, to Sam's cabin, to the life they were slowly building together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mountain trail as Sam led their small party down toward Florence. Zeke stumbled between two horses, his hands bound tight behind his back, his face pale with pain from his broken ribs. Lenora rode Sam's bay mare, while Jonas walked beside her, keeping one hand on the stirrup leather. The journey had taken most of 2 days. They'd stopped only when necessary, camping in sheltered spots where Sam could keep watch. Now, as they approached the army post, the familiar sounds of military life drifted up to meet them. The crack of the morning flag raising, horses nickering in the corral, the clatter of mess tins. Sam's jaw tightened as they drew closer. He hadn't been near an army post in years, not since leaving his scouting days behind. But Lenora had insisted this was the right way, bringing Zeke to proper justice rather than leaving him to the mountain's mercy. At the gate, 2 young soldiers snapped to attention, their eyes widening at the sight of the bound prisoner. "State your business," the taller one called out. "Got an outlaw here needs turning in," Sam said gruffly. "Name's Zeke Monroe, wanted for burning mission property on the reservation." The soldiers exchanged glances. "Wait here," the shorter one said, disappearing inside the stockade. Minutes later, he returned with an older man, wearing a black coat and carrying a wooden cane. Preacher Isaac Talltree moved with the careful dignity of age, his silver hair catching the morning light. His dark eyes showed recognition as they fell on Sam. "Samuel Boone," he said softly. "It has been many years." Sam nodded stiffly. "Preacher, Sarah's death weighs heavy still, I see." The Cherokee elder's voice was gentle. "She would be proud, seeing you here today, choosing the path of proper justice." Sam's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. He hadn't expected to find anyone here who remembered her, let alone someone who had known her well enough to speak her name with such respect. Talltree turned his attention to their prisoner. "Zeke Monroe, we've had reports of your activities against the mission school, burning sacred texts, destroying food stores meant for the children." His voice carried the weight of judgment. "The tribal council will be pleased to see you answer for these crimes." Zeke spat on the ground. "Ain't answering to no Indian council." "You'll answer to the United States Army," Talltree replied calmly, "who recognize both tribal and federal jurisdiction in these matters." He gestured to the soldiers. "Take him to the stockade. Ensure his injuries are treated before transport to the territorial prison." As the soldiers led Zeke away, a commotion arose from the direction of the post's kitchen garden. 2 young boys, their dark hair gleaming in the sun, came running toward them. "Jonas!" they cried out in Navajo. "Little brother!" Jonas's face lit up with recognition. "Ki! Ashki!" He rushed to meet his cousins, and they collided in a tangle of arms and tears and laughter. The boys spoke rapidly in their native tongue, touching Jonas's face and shoulders as if making sure he was real. Lenora slid down from the horse, her eyes bright with tears. "We thought everyone from the mission was scattered," she said softly to Sam. "What a blessing to find his family here." Talltree nodded. "These boys' mother works in our infirmary. She has been sick with grief, believing Jonas lost in the fire." The reunion continued, the boys' voices carrying across the yard. Then Jonas turned back toward Sam and Lenora, his expression suddenly anxious. He spoke quietly with his cousins before approaching the adults. "Uncle," he said to Talltree in careful English, "I want to ask something important." He stood very straight, though his hands twisted nervously in his shirt. "Can I stay with Mr. Sam and Miss Lenora?" "Just for a while longer." Talltree's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You wish to remain with them?" Jonas nodded earnestly. "They are teaching me about the mountain, about tracking and trapping and reading, and—" He glanced back at his cousins, then continued in a rush. "They need me, to help with the cabin and the horses, and to remember how to be a family." The old preacher looked thoughtfully between Sam and Lenora, noting how they had unconsciously moved closer together, their shared concern for Jonas clear in their faces. "There are proper channels for such arrangements," he said slowly. "Papers to be filed, permissions to be granted." He held up a hand as Jonas's face fell. "But as it happens, I am authorized by both the Army and the Tribal Council to witness such agreements. If your cousin's family approves, and if Mr. Boone and Miss Bright are willing—" "We are," Lenora said quickly, while Sam nodded, his weathered face softening as Jonas beamed at them both. "Then we shall make it official." Talltree smiled. "The boy speaks truth. Sometimes the Creator brings together those who need each other most, making new families from the ashes of sorrow." The journey back to the mountain cabin took longer than their descent, but the trail felt lighter somehow. Even the horses seemed to sense the change, their steps more eager as familiar landmarks appeared through the trees. When they finally crested the last ridge, the sight of the cabin's weathered logs brought unexpected warmth to all three hearts. The shed's charred remains stood as a stark reminder of that terrible night, but Sam wasted no time in organizing their recovery. "First things first," he said, running calloused hands over the scorched timbers. "We'll salvage what we can, then start fresh with new logs." Jonas proved an eager helper, his small hands quick to sort through the debris. He separated burnt wood from usable pieces, creating neat piles while humming a tune Lenora had taught him. The boy's natural orderliness brought a slight smile to Sam's weathered face. "You've got a good eye there, son," Sam said, watching Jonas examine a partially burned board. The words slipped out naturally, and neither of them remarked on it, though Jonas's smile grew wider. Lenora took charge of the cabin's interior, airing out the smoke-damaged quilts and sorting through their meager supplies. The familiar motions of domestic work felt different now, purposeful rather than merely necessary. She found herself planning improvements, a new shelf here, perhaps some curtains there, small touches to make the space more welcoming. As the days passed, their work fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sam and Jonas would spend the mornings cutting and hauling fresh timber, while Lenora gathered pine boughs for new bedding and worked on replacing the ruined quilts. The afternoon sun would find them all working together, fitting logs and mixing mud and straw for chinking. "My grandfather taught me this is how you test if the mud's right," Jonas explained one afternoon, rolling a small ball between his palms. "If it stays together but doesn't stick too much to your hands, it's perfect." Sam nodded approvingly, adding the mixture to the growing stack of prepared materials. On the fourth day, as the new shed began taking shape, Jonas stood contemplating the cabin's front door. "Mr. Sam," he said carefully, "in the old days, my people would mark their homes with special signs to show who belonged there." Sam looked up from his work, understanding dawning in his eyes. He disappeared into the cabin, returning with his carving knife. "Reckon this place could use some marking?" he said, handing the knife to Jonas. Make it good and deep so it lasts." With painstaking care, Jonas carved his name into the wooden frame above the door. The letters were careful and precise, showing the results of Lenora's reading lessons. When he finished, he stood back, pride shining in his dark eyes. "That's fine work," Sam said softly, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Real fine work." Inside the cabin, Lenora sat at the rough-hewn table, a letter spread before her. She'd carried it all this way, this unsent message to her Aunt Mary, written in those first days of finding refuge. Now, reading those desperate words, she saw how much had changed. Taking a fresh sheet of paper, she began to write anew. "Dearest Aunt Mary," she wrote, her pen scratching softly against the paper. "We're safe. We're building something new." She paused, looking around the cabin, at Jonas's carved spoons lined up on the shelf, at Sam's traps hanging neatly by the door, at the half-finished quilt stretched across her lap. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing healing where we least expect it. We've found family here on the mountain." That evening, as darkness settled over the peaks, snow began to fall. But unlike that terrible night of violence, these flakes drifted down in peaceful silence, blanketing the world in gentle white. The new shed stood strong against the weather, its fresh-cut timber gleaming in the fading light. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and life. Jonas sat on a low stool while Lenora gently brushed his dark hair, humming the hymn that had become their evening ritual. The boy's eyes were heavy with contentment. His body relaxed in a way it hadn't been since they'd found him by the river. Sam watched them from his chair by the fire, his usual stoic expression softened by something that might have been peace. The cabin had been just shelter once, a place to keep the world at bay. Now, with Lenora's quiet songs and Jonas's careful letters above the door, it was becoming something else entirely. The brush moved rhythmically through Jonas's hair as Lenora's hymn filled the quiet spaces. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake a tiny blessing on their newfound home. Within these walls, something broken had begun to mend. 3 wounded souls weaving themselves into a tapestry of belonging, stronger perhaps for having been torn and carefully stitched back together. 2 weeks of steady work transformed the cabin and its inhabitants. The new shed stood proudly beside the main building, its fresh-cut timber weathering to match the older logs. Inside the cabin, Lenora's touches had softened the sparse interior. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and carefully mended curtains framed the windows. The morning Sam prepared for his ride to the agency post dawned clear and cold. He checked his saddlebags twice, making sure Lenora's carefully written letter was secure alongside the formal request for Jonas's guardianship. The boy watched from the doorway, trying to hide his nervousness behind a brave face. "You'll do right by me, won't you, Mr. Sam?" Jonas asked quietly as Sam tightened his horse's cinch. Sam paused, then turned to face the boy fully. "That I will, son. Got my word on it." Lenora stood in the doorway, wrapping her shawl tight against the morning chill. "We'll keep the home fires burning," she said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. They all knew how much rested on this journey. The trail to the agency post wound through valleys, still heavy with winter's grip. Sam's horse picked its way carefully through patches of crusty snow, steam rising from its flanks in the cold air. His mind turned over and over the words he'd need to convince the agent. A man he'd heard was fresh from Boston and full of Eastern ideas about proper families. The agency building came into view by mid-morning, its whitewashed walls stark against the mountain backdrop. Sam dismounted, brushed the trail dust from his coat, and straightened his back before entering. The young agent, barely 30 by Sam's guess, sat behind a broad desk covered in neat stacks of papers. "Mr. Boone," the agent said, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "What brings a mountain man to my office?" Sam laid out the papers, Lenora's letter explaining Jonas's situation, the formal request for guardianship, and references from Preacher Talltree vouching for Sam's character. The agent read through them slowly, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. "You understand, Mr. Boone, that this is highly irregular," the agent said, setting the papers down. "A single man, living in near isolation, requesting guardianship of a native child. Ain't nothing regular about saving a boy's life," Sam replied evenly. "Or about him choosing to stay with folks who care for him." The agent drummed his fingers on the desk, considering. "There are proper channels, proper homes. He's got a proper home," Sam interrupted, his voice firm but respectful. "Got a woman there teaching him letters and scripture, got warm beds and full bellies, got love." Something in Sam's steady gaze must have reached the young agent. After a long moment, he picked up his pen and began filling out the necessary forms. "I'll approve this provisionally," he said, "but you'll need to appear before Judge Harrison when he makes his circuit in spring. He'll want to see the boy's situation for himself." "Much obliged," Sam said, accepting the stamped papers with careful hands. Rather than heading straight home, Sam guided his horse toward the remains of the mission school. The burned-out building stood like a black skeleton against the afternoon sky, its windows empty and accusing. He dismounted slowly, memories of another burned home trying to surface in his mind. Inside, ash crunched under his boots. Charred desks lay toppled, and melted glass glinted dully in the winter light. But there, hanging crooked on a partially standing wall, was something that made his breath catch, a cross-stitched sampler, somehow spared by the flames. The word hope stood out in faded but clear letters, surrounded by a border of carefully worked flowers. Sam gently lifted it from its nail, remembering how Lenora had mentioned teaching sewing at the mission. This piece of her past, preserved against all odds, seemed like a sign. He wrapped it carefully in his spare shirt and tucked it into his saddlebag. The sun was setting when he finally reached the cabin. Smoke rose straight from the chimney into the darkening sky, and lamplight glowed warm in the windows. Jonas burst through the door as Sam dismounted, eager for news. "Did they say yes? Can I stay?" Sam pulled out the official papers. "For now, and permanent come spring, God willing." Lenora appeared in the doorway, hope and question in her eyes. Sam reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the wrapped sampler. Without a word, he handed it to her, watching as she carefully unfolded the cloth. Her fingers traced the stitches, tears welling in her eyes as she recognized her student's work. "I thought everything was lost," she whispered. "Not everything," Sam said quietly, looking at the family gathered in the doorway of their shared home. "Not the things that matter most." The mountain air grew warmer as winter loosened its grip on the high country. Patches of bare ground emerged between melting snowdrifts, and the creek ran full with clear, cold water. Sam stood at the edge of the clearing near their cabin, marking out the foundation for a second small dwelling with wooden stakes and twine. Jonas watched from nearby, handing Sam tools as needed. "Is this really going to be mine someday?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. "That it is," Sam replied, driving another stake into the softening earth. "Every man needs his own place when he comes of age. Reckon you'll want that too, in time." Inside the main cabin, Lenora hummed softly while working on her latest project. Her skilled hands wove dried vines through strips of tanned hide, gradually forming the shape of a cradle. The afternoon light streamed through the window, warming her back as she worked. She had learned the weaving technique from Jonas's stories about his grandmother's crafts, blending it with her own knowledge of frontier handicrafts. Sam spent his evenings by the fire, carefully whittling a piece of pine wood. Shavings fell at his feet as the shape of a hawk emerged beneath his knife. Jonas sat close by, watching the bird take form with each precise cut. The firelight caught the deep lines of concentration on Sam's weathered face as he worked on the details of the wings and talons. "Why a hawk?" Jonas asked one evening, reaching out to touch the smooth wooden surface. "Saw one circling above when I first found you by the river," Sam answered, his voice gentle. "Seemed like a sign, showing me where to look. Reckon that makes it special." As spring drew nearer, Talk turned to practical matters. The circuit judge would arrive soon, and they needed to make everything official. One evening after supper, Sam cleared his throat. "Been thinking about your surname, Jonas, for the papers." Lenora looked up from her mending. "Let him choose," she said with a warm smile. "It should be his decision." Jonas sat quietly for a moment, rolling the wooden hawk between his palms. Then his face brightened with certainty. "I want to be Jonas Bright Boone," he declared, "because you're both my family now." Sam's eyes grew misty, though he tried to hide it by stoking the fire. Lenora reached across the table and squeezed Jonas's hand. The name hung in the air between them, a bridge connecting their separate paths into one shared journey. "Bright Boone it is," Sam said softly, his voice rough with emotion. The wooden hawk found its permanent place on the mantel that night, watching over their newly named family as they sat together in the warmth of their home. Morning sunlight painted the Bitterroot Mountains in shades of gold and green. The last patches of snow had finally surrendered to spring's warm embrace, revealing tender shoots of grass and early wildflowers. Birds called from the awakening forest, chickadees, thrushes, and mountain bluebirds announcing the change of seasons. Sam stood beside the freshly carved signpost, his weathered hand still bearing traces of wood shavings. The letters he had carefully carved read, "Bright Boone Homestead," each character deep and sure in the pine wood. Lenora stepped forward, running her fingers over the smooth surface of their family name. The silver ring hanging from the leather cord around her neck caught the morning light. Sam had given it to her 2 days ago, without ceremony, but with eyes full of quiet devotion. Now it rested close to her heart, a simple promise of belonging. Inside the cabin, on the rough-hewn table, lay Lenora's letter to Aunt Mary. The pages were filled with neat script telling of mercy found in the mountains, of a boy who needed them, and of love growing quiet and strong like spring grass through melting snow. The envelope sat sealed and stamped, waiting for the next trader to carry it down to the valley. Jonas darted around the yard, his moccasins barely touching the ground as he explored the newly revealed earth. His dark eyes scanned the brightening sky, alert for any movement. Suddenly he stopped and pointed upward, his whole body trembling with excitement. "Mama, Papa, look at the eagle!" His voice rang clear across the yard, full of wonder and joy. The great bird soared overhead, wings spread wide against the blue sky. Sam watched the boy's excitement, his own face softening into a broad smile, a rare sight that transformed his weathered features. He turned to Lenora, speaking softly so only she could hear, "Guess he already gave us children." Lenora's fingers found Sam's calloused hand and clasped it tight. Her eyes shone with happy tears as she watched Jonas racing back toward them, his face glowing with the pure joy of belonging. Together, they turned toward their cabin door. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the freshly swept porch, 3 figures moving as one into the warmth of their home. Above them, the eagle wheeled once more across the vast spring sky, while the new signpost stood proud, marking not just a homestead, but the place where Mercy had built a family. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.